Between 1870 and 1900, hundreds of stagecoaches were robbed on roads across the West. Some outlaws left behind notes with poems, others killed for $20. One of them pulled off 28 robberies without firing a single shot. Here are 25 facts Hollywood never showed you. The first one starts now. Number 1. Tom Bell, the first stagecoach robbery in the United States. In August 1856, Thomas Hodges stopped a stagecoach near Marysville, California. He had been a doctor in the war against Mexico, became an outlaw, and started calling himself Tom Bell. Inside the stagecoach was about $100,000 in gold, a fortune at the time. It was the first recorded stagecoach robbery in the country, and Bell had 8 armed men with him. But the guard refused to hand anything over. He fought back, the passengers helped, and the shootout lasted for minutes. The driver kept the horses at a full gallop and got away. Bell made off with $0 and left a female passenger dead behind him. 2 months later, on October 4th, a group of farmers found him near the San Joaquin River. There was no trial. They let him write a letter to his mother and hanged him right there from a tree branch. The first stagecoach robbery in American history earned the outlaw nothing and cost him his life within 60 days. Number 2. Black Bart, 28 robberies, not a single shot fired. Between 1875 and 1883, one man held up 28 Wells Fargo stagecoaches in California without ever pulling the trigger. He covered his head with a flour sack, pointed his shotgun, and asked for the strongbox, with a please and a thank you. The gun, they later discovered, had never been loaded. In at least 2 robberies, he left a handwritten poem inside the empty safe, signed Black Bart, the P.O.8. He mocked the company in verse, then signed his name. 8 years of searching. What gave him away wasn't a shootout. It was a handkerchief left at the scene with a laundry mark on it. The Wells Fargo detective visited nearly 90 laundries before finding the owner. His name was Charles Bowles, a Union veteran of the Civil War, a former teacher, 54 years old, and a respected San Francisco resident. None of his neighbors suspected a thing. He was sentenced to 6 years in San Quentin and got out after 4. In 1888, he walked through the prison gates and disappeared without a trace. He was never seen again. Number 3. Pearl Hart, the last stagecoach robbery in Arizona in 1899. On May 30th, 1899, near Globe in the Arizona Territory, a stagecoach was stopped on the road. The person pointing the revolver was a short-haired woman dressed in men's clothes, Pearl Hart, alongside her partner, Joe Boot. They took about $450 from the passengers, and, according to witnesses, she gave each of them $1 back so they could get home. It was one of the last stagecoach robberies of the Old West, at a time when trains were already taking over the routes. Arrested just a few days later, the case made headlines across the country. In court, the jury refused to convict a woman and found her not guilty. The judge wouldn't accept it. That same day, he ordered her to be tried again, this time for stealing the driver's revolver. This time, she got 5 years in Yuma prison. Joe Boot got 30. She served less than 2 years and was pardoned by the governor in 1902. The jury let her go because she was a woman. The judge changed the charge and locked her up anyway. Number 4. Big Nose George Parrot, the outlaw who became a pair of shoes. In the 1870s, George Parrot robbed stagecoaches in Wyoming. In 1878, his gang tried to derail a train near Medicine Bow. The plan failed, but 2 lawmen who went after them ended up dead. George was arrested in Montana in 1880 and sentenced to hang. In March 1881, he tried to escape from jail. The town of Rawlins didn't wait for the scheduled date. A mob dragged him out and hanged him from a telegraph pole. Then things got strange. 2 doctors took possession of the body. One of them, John Osborne, removed the skin from his chest and thighs and had it made into a pair of shoes. 12 years later, Osborne was elected governor of Wyoming, and the story goes that he wore those shoes to his inauguration. The top of the skull went to Lillian Heath, the state's first female doctor, who used it as an ashtray. The rest of the body was stuffed into a whiskey barrel and buried until workers found it in 1950. The shoes are still in the Rawlins Museum today. Number 5. Dick Fellows, the robber who couldn't stay on a horse. His real name was George Britton Lytle, the son of a well-educated Kentucky family. In 1870s California, he took the name Dick Fellows and chose the worst possible line of work for someone who couldn't ride: robbing Wells Fargo stagecoaches. December 1875, near Caliente. He stops the stagecoach, grabs the strongbox, and the rented horse takes off without him. That left him carrying the heavy load down the road on foot until he was caught and arrested. He escaped from jail, broke his leg jumping over the wall, and still managed to steal a horse tied up in the street. The animal had never been ridden and threw him to the ground immediately. He was recaptured right there, lying on the ground. In 1882, the same scene played out again. Another robbery, another escape, another horse, another fall. Newspapers at the time began covering his trials like a show. He ended up in Folsom, serving a life sentence. Number 6. Sam Bass, the Robin Hood of Texas, who never gave anything to anyone. In the 1870s, Sam Bass robbed stagecoaches and trains across Texas. After his death, ballads turned him into a hero who stole from the rich and helped the poor. There was just one problem. There isn't a single record of him ever making a donation. No receipt, no testimony, nothing. What the records show is something else. Bass spent the money on racehorses, liquor, and gambling. His reputation for being generous came from paying bar tabs with $20 gold coins and not asking for change. His end wasn't the way the legend tells it either. The man who turned him in was Jim Murphy, a member of his own gang who made a deal with the Texas Rangers to stay out of jail. In July 1878 in Round Rock, the Rangers surrounded the group. Bass was shot and died 2 days later on his 27th birthday. The Robin Hood of Texas was sold out by a friend who only wanted to save his own skin. Number 7. Henry Plummer, the sheriff who ran the outlaws. Bannock, Montana, 1863. Gold coming out of the ground, people pouring in from everywhere, and no real law. The townspeople elected Henry Plummer sheriff. He was educated, well-spoken, the kind of man you'd trust with the key to your house. What no one knew was that while wearing the badge, Plummer was giving orders to a gang called the Innocents, about 100 men who robbed stagecoaches loaded with gold on the very roads he was supposed to protect. The setup was simple. Plummer knew who was traveling, when they were leaving, and what they were carrying. He passed along the information. The robberies happened. Then he showed up himself to investigate the crime and never found anyone guilty. The death toll is estimated at between 50 and 100. In January 1864, a group of vigilantes had had enough. They hanged Plummer on the gallows he himself had ordered built. 2 of his deputies went up with him. Both of them were part of the gang. Number 8. Charlie Parkhurst, the stagecoach driver who was a woman. In 1850s California, anyone who needed to cross the mountains with gold in the strongbox wanted one name holding the reins: Charlie Parkhurst. Short, strong, tobacco tucked in the corner of the mouth, and wearing an eye patch after a horse's kick took out the left eye. Charlie was known for driving down narrow trails in the dark and arriving on time. Swore, played cards, and drank with the passengers. No one suspected a thing for 30 years. In 1867, Charlie registered to vote in Soquel, voted in the 1868 election as a man on paper. When Charlie died in December 1879, the doctor preparing the body discovered that Charlie was biologically female. Born in New Hampshire around 1812, Charlie had run away from an orphanage as a young girl, dressed as a boy. Charlie voted 52 years before the amendment that gave American women the right to vote. Many people consider Charlie the first American woman to vote in a presidential election. Number 9. The shotgun messenger. Everyone has said riding shotgun to claim the front seat. Almost no one knows that it started with a man who sat there knowing he might not make it home. He was a Wells Fargo guard. He rode beside the driver with a short-barreled shotgun across his lap, loaded with buckshot. At his feet was a green pine box reinforced with iron straps, heavy even when empty, the Stagecoach strongbox. The driver handled the horses and didn't have the key. That box was one man's responsibility alone. The pay was about 3 times what a cowboy made. That was the price of the risk. In 1884, the company's chief detective, James B. Hume, added it up. In 14 years, more than 340 Stagecoach robberies. 4 guards died on the job. 2 drivers did too. One of them, Mike Tovey, spent 20 years on California roads. He was shot in ambushes twice and came back. The 3rd time, in 1893, on a road near Ione, he didn't come back. Number 10. What was really inside those boxes? Everyone pictures a chest overflowing with gold. The reality was more modest. A Wells Fargo strongbox carried, on average, anywhere from $1,000 to $20,000 in gold, cash, or banknotes. Only on routes coming out of mining regions did the amount go up, and then it could reach $100,000 in a single trip. But Charles Bowles, the man who signed his name Black Bart, almost never got one of those. His average take from 28 robberies was $650. Not much, but steady. Over 8 years on the road, between 1875 and 1883, he took about $18,000 in total. And here's the part almost no one talks about. Wells Fargo spent practically the same amount, $18,000, on detectives, rewards, and travel to catch him. In the end, the company neither lost nor gained. It broke even against a man who worked on foot, with no horse and no accomplice. Number 11. Wells Fargo's reward system. The biggest outlaw hunter in the Old West wasn't the sheriff. It was a company. Wells Fargo paid $250 for every robber turned in and up to $500 for the return of the gold. It didn't ask how you got them. Dead or alive, the money was paid either way. Overnight, it became a business. Farmers, former soldiers, unemployed cowboys, everyone started carrying a gun and looking for the reward because $250 was almost a year's pay for the average worker. And it didn't stop there. By 1880, the company already had about 400 special agents spread across the West, led by Chief Detective James B. Hume and his partner, Jonathan Thacker. Hume did what law enforcement at the time didn't do. He wrote everything down: name, nickname, scars, the way they walked, who ran with whom. In 1885, he published those records. It was the most complete picture of crime in the West, and it belonged to a company, not the government. Number 12. The steep climb. On a flat road, a stagecoach traveled at about 5 miles per hour. But when the road started climbing into the mountains, that same stagecoach slowed to 2 miles per hour, walking speed. And that was exactly where the outlaws waited. They didn't pick the spot on impulse. They studied the route for weeks, marking every hill with a grade over 10%. At that point, the driver had no way to escape. The horses were already at their limit, pulling the weight uphill. The guard was exposed, sitting up front with nowhere to take cover. And the trap was simpler than you might think. A log laid across the road. That was it. With no room to go around, the stagecoach stopped. Then one man appeared up ahead with a rifle pointed at them, while the others closed in from both sides. Pinkerton Detective Agency records show this same setup in more than 60% of the robberies they investigated. Number 13. Female stagecoach passengers were almost never searched. In the Old West, when a gang stopped a stagecoach, the routine was always the same: men out, hands up, pockets turned inside out. But there was one rule that had never been written down anywhere: you didn't lay a hand on a woman. Searching a female passenger was considered dishonorable, and any man who did it would lose the respect of even his own partners. Travelers caught on quickly. Before boarding, the money, watches, documents, and family jewelry were handed over to wives, daughters, and sisters. They sewed coins into the hems of their dresses, strapped bundles of cash under their skirts, and hid gold in the frame of their petticoats. The result showed up in Wells Fargo reports. Men stepped off the stagecoach with nothing, while the real treasure kept traveling, sitting right beside them, untouched. Number 14. The informants, the real reason most of them got caught. Everyone pictures an outlaw going down in a shootout. That's not how it happened. Wells Fargo detectives, led by James B. Hume, discovered that most stagecoach robbers were turned in by people they knew. The horse-changing stations were the weak spot. Poorly paid stable hands, cooks, and innkeepers worked there, and they knew the exact time every stagecoach left and what was inside the strongbox. An outlaw needed that information, and the same man who sold the schedule to the robber sold the robber's name to the detective. Wells Fargo paid cash rewards and even a share of the recovered money. Anyone who wouldn't take the money got a different kind of conversation, a visit and a threat that they could be charged as an accomplice. Hume wrote everything down: names, nicknames, who drank too much, who talked too much. In the end, almost none of them went down because of a bullet. They went down because someone talked. Number 15. The reward for Black Bart: almost nothing for 28 robberies. Between 1875 and 1883, a gray-bearded man held up 28 Wells Fargo stagecoaches in California. His name was Charles Bowles, but he became known as Black Bart. He never fired a shot. He carried an unloaded shotgun and, during some robberies, left signed poems inside the empty strongbox. He never used a horse. He did everything on foot. After 8 years, Wells Fargo offered an $800 reward for him, less than $30 per robbery. To the company, he was more of a nuisance than a threat. No one had been hurt, and no one believed it was worth spending more to catch him. What brought Black Bart down was a handkerchief. A detective named Harry Morse traced the laundry mark through nearly 90 businesses in San Francisco until he found the right name. Morse was paid separately for the work. Bowles got 6 years in prison. Number 16. The peak of the robberies, 1875 to 1885. If you wanted to rob a stagecoach, those 10 years were the perfect time, and the outlaws knew it. Wells Fargo kept track of everything. In just over a decade, the company recorded more than 300 stagecoach robberies and losses of nearly $415,000. Each iron strongbox was strapped beneath the driver's seat, with a man holding a shotgun sitting beside him, the shotgun messenger. The reason was simple. The West already had gold, payrolls, and banks. What it still didn't have was railroad tracks. Wherever the train couldn't reach, the stagecoach was the only way to move money, and it traveled at 8 miles per hour on a dirt road as predictable as clockwork. Then the railroad came. Every new line that opened erased a stagecoach route from the map, and the robberies died along with it. Number 17. The railroad effect, the natural end of stagecoach robberies. No one arrested the last stagecoach robber. The railroad ran him over. Starting in 1869, when the tracks crossed the country from coast to coast, every new stretch wiped another stagecoach route off the map. With no passengers, no cargo, and no gold on the road, there was nothing left to steal. Between 1885 and 1895, robberies dropped by about 70%, and no sheriff had anything to do with it. The outlaws got the message and switched targets. A train's vault car carried far more than any stagecoach. Wells Fargo shipped fortunes inside, locked behind steel. But the job got tougher. It took dynamite, trained men, precise timing, and a willingness to face armed guards. Names like Butch Cassidy came out of this new line of work. Meanwhile, there were still parts of the United States without a single railroad track where the old stagecoach kept running, already treated as a reminder of a time that had come to an end. Number 18. The maximum penalty only existed because of the mail. Robbing a stagecoach was a state crime. You got 5 to 10 years in prison, and that was it. But all it took was one bag of United States mail inside that strongbox for the whole situation to change. Then the case was taken out of the local sheriff's hands and went straight to the federal government, and federal law allowed the death penalty for anyone who robbed the mail while putting lives at risk. The smarter outlaws knew this by heart. Charles Bowles, the man who became known as Black Bart, robbed nearly 30 Wells Fargo stagecoaches in California and always targeted the company's strongbox, the private money. When he was finally arrested in 1883, he was tried in state court and got 6 years in San Quentin. He got out after 4. That was the invisible line separating prison from the gallows. It wasn't how much money was taken or whether the driver was shot. It was whether that bag of letters was inside the stagecoach. Number 19. Black Bart's sentence. 6 years, served 4. In November 1883, a gray-haired man in a suit walked into a courtroom in San Andreas, California. The name on the documents was Charles Bowles. In the newspapers, Black Bart, the outlaw who robbed 28 Wells Fargo stagecoaches without ever firing a shot. In 2 robberies, he left signed poems inside the empty strongbox. The judge gave him 6 years in San Quentin. He served 4 years and 2 months. He got out in January 1888, thinner, deaf in one ear, and with failing eyesight. Reporters were already waiting outside the prison. They asked if he would go back to robbing stagecoaches. He said no. Then one of them pressed him. "What about the poems you left in the strongboxes? Will you write any more?" Bowles laughed and replied that he had already said he would not commit any more crimes. A few weeks later, he disappeared from a hotel in Visalia, California. Wells Fargo searched for him. No one ever found him again. Number 20. Pearl Hart's pardon, without a single line of explanation. In 1899, Pearl Hart robbed a stagecoach in the Arizona Territory and made headlines across the country. She was sentenced to 5 years and sent to the Yuma Territorial Prison, where she was practically the only woman among hundreds of men. She served about 3 years. In December 1902, with roughly 2 years still left on her sentence, Governor Alexander Brody signed the pardon. On paper, there was no reason. No explanation in the official record, no public statement, either then or later. The newspapers filled in the gap however they could. The version that stuck was this: Pearl had supposedly become pregnant inside the prison. And if that were true, someone would have to explain how, because the list of men with access to her cell was short and included people from the government itself. Yuma also had no facilities at all for a pregnant prisoner. Brody never addressed the subject. Pearl left Yuma, left the territory, and disappeared from the records for years. Number 21. The second to last documented stagecoach robbery. By 1908, the stagecoach was almost a thing of the past. Trains carried people and cargo everywhere, but in the mountains of Nevada, where the tracks didn't reach, it still had one job: carrying the payroll for the gold mines. That year, 2 men stopped one of those stagecoaches and took $200 in gold coins, the monthly wages of dozens of miners. 3 days later, both men were in jail. The reason was simple. The town had only one saloon. They were new faces around there and started paying for drinks with gold coins fresh from the mine. In a small town, everyone notices. Someone told the sheriff. The entire investigation took less than a week. There was no horseback chase or shootout on the road. There was a bar counter and two strangers spending too much money in the only place in town where someone was bound to notice. Number 22, the last Stagecoach robbery. By 1916, the Ford Model T was already traveling across the country, but an isolated valley in Nevada still depended on horses. There was no road. That was why, on December 5th of that year, the mail stagecoach was still making the trip from Rogerson to Jarbidge, with Fred Searcy holding the reins and about $3,200 in payroll money on board. It never made it to town. Hours later, residents found the wagon stopped among the willows, with Searcy dead from a gunshot to the back of the head. There were tracks in the snow and a bloody handprint on a mail envelope. Ben Cool was arrested. At the trial, the prosecution presented that palm print. It was the first time an American court accepted that kind of evidence to convict a man. Cool was sentenced to death, later reduced to life in prison, and was released in 1945. The detail that brings the story full circle. The stagecoach didn't survive because of tradition. It survived because progress still hadn't made its way there.